Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Azure podcast. I'm your host, or one of your hosts, Evan Baslick. I'm joined today by my fellow host, Kale, and then we've got our special guest, Ryan Borstelman. He's going to talk about how automation makes his life easier. This is sort of one of our in the real world sessions. We're recording. This is episode number 453, and we are recording this on February 2nd of 2023. So before we get to Ryan, let's like normal, let's get into the news. Kale, looks like you got some stuff out here. What do you want to talk about?
Yeah, I got a few things. I hope this automation discussion isn't about how Chat GPT just takes over everything. So looking forward to some other details there, but just joking. Yeah, there's a lot of
we're
hype
gonna
there.
we're gonna turn the podcast into a Chat GPT thing.
Yeah, I got three things here today. The first one is, and most of these are about GA type things, kind of more announcement stuff, stuff that's been there in pre-release and is now graduating to GA. The first is Azure load testing. Something super important when you're building applications, especially that need to scale and have capacity demands and things like that. Azure load testing is a fully managed load testing service. For those who don't know, um, super cool. Lots of features, lots of walkthroughs to help you create your load tests. And this service has been out there for a while, and now it's basically going up into GA. This is also one of those services where, if you had to do this yourself, I've done this in the past, years back, where we had to build our own load testing rigs. That can be quite time consuming as well as, costly. So this allows you to only pay for what you need. So basically, you can scale up and basically create whatever levels of load that you need on your system without having to have tons of compute sitting there idle when you're not using it, right? So this is actually a really great use case for cloud where we have these kind of
Yeah,
spiky kind of loads.
yeah.
The second one is something that's pretty popular from a reverse proxy standpoint and things like that on the internet when you're running, again, high scale websites typically is Nginx. I didn't even know this was available in preview, so I must have missed this
I
one,
didn't
but
either. I
it's
missed that
GA.
too. Yeah, it's pretty cool.
So when I first saw the word, I was like, what is that? But it's Nginx as a service. Which, as I mentioned, it's a typical reverse proxy or kind of a front end, if you will, where your traffic is going to come into initially and be routed typically based on rules and things like that. And this is really cool because we have this available in the marketplace, allows people to basically spin these up without a lot of nonsense, right? This Nginx is open source, right? You could configure it in all kinds of different platforms, containers or native and all this kind of stuff. But again, this just lowers the bar to, hey, how can I get that thing stood up as fast as possible to allow me to start routing stuff and pay for only what I need? And the last one is a little bit about our green energy stuff, and it's around our high performance computing. High performance computing entails quite a bit of things like GPUs and other types of scaling things for like really high performance, big workload, AI, those type of workload type stuff. And basically, this article is pretty good that one of our leads has put up here, talking about like Microsoft's commitment with HPC, specifically around AI and how we've kind of built things in the cloud to help, from an energy standpoint, because these workloads can chew up lots of power.
Yeah,
And so the investments that we've made there to basically make that easier for customers to go spin that up, but also be as green as possible on like energy consumption. Super cool. So I won't get into the details here, but there's a demo and stuff up there, and as well as a lot of information about that. So that's
yeah.
it.
No, I was thinking about this the other day because I used to run a server here at home, and ages ago, and I mean, it costs money. And I certainly wasn't invested in like making sure that was running the most efficient possible. It just sort of shows up in the electric bill. And now I run that workload in the cloud, and obviously I work for Microsoft, but also like I do like the idea that we're investing in sort of making stuff greener under the covers, and I get the benefit as a person while living and walking around the world, right? Just like I still have this need for it, but as Microsoft invests in the green stuff, I get the benefit. It's that centralization is neat, right? From that sense, because no one person's going to invest in it. but when the industry does, like, because Google invests in this as well, Amazon does as well, right? It's just good for everybody. I mean, even the blockchain stuff, Kale, that you spend a lot of time with, right? Y'all have invested a bunch in the last few years at figuring out how do you reduce the energy consumption of the blockchain, right? You know, because you're one of those compute intensive workloads, right? At the
Yeah,
end of the day.
yeah, for sure.
So, great. Yeah, no, those are good news. A couple of things I want to call out real quick. So one, AKS, this has actually been around for a while, but AKS is changing their pricing tier model. They used to have this, you could purchase this SLA version of it, so the control plane had an SLA. They sort of have refactored that as a free and a standard tier, just so that it's a little bit more clear to people what they're getting, because we were still finding people weren't adopting the SLA tier for critical workloads. And then the other one is Chaos Studios released, some VNet injection capabilities, some dynamic targeting for shutdowns, so you can test across zones. And they've got some key vault capabilities in terms of sort of making certificates not available temporarily. Again, just letting you inject more failures. And then the third thing I want to call out, and this just got extended, and so this is why this sort of made the news. From my perspective, but I still think it's something, I don't think enough people are thinking about. So classic VMs, the original Azure VM control plane model, they've been on the deprecation path for quite a while. I think it was supposed to hit in April of this year or March of this year. Yeah, we were gonna, you couldn't turn them on anymore after March. For lots of good reasons, that got extended to September. But if you're running these classic VMs, the clock is ticking. You should be planning on moving it. We've invested a ton in making it easier to move, for sure. I remember when those migrations failed, like 80% of the time. So we invested a lot in making that much easier to move, with minimal or no downtime, depending on exactly what you have deployed. But if you don't have this on your roadmap, you need to, because in September these things will not turn back on. And that is
Evan,
not a day. Yeah.
So Evan, how do customers know? I mean, I'm sure we're probably sending emails, but sometimes those emails get lost if they went to like a different admin or something.
Yeah.
So how do they know? Like, is there something like would hit them in the face if they went into their Azure
Yeah,
subscription?
so it'll show up as a classic VM. It actually is tagged as classic.
Okay.
So you can see it when you look in the portal. I know if you look at the documentation, I'm pretty sure we have some scripts and some other queries you can run to see what's running in your environment that's classic VM. So
Cool.
yeah, we'll provide a link to the sort of the content, and if you drill into the content, it'll list it. But yeah, go do a survey of your estate, right? Make sure it's not, because you do not want to wake up September 1st and find out that some of your workloads are no longer running anymore. Because I think, Ryan, because I see you nodding a little bit, so you probably got some context on this. I think not only do we prevent new ones from getting turned on the first, or existing ones that are turned off turn back on, but I think we actually shut down anything that's running on September 1st as well.
Yeah, I believe no new deployments after March 31st, and then all existing deployments are done. Barring some edge extended contract stuff, classic Microsoft deprecation stuff. But yeah, I think, and we also make it really hard to actually create a classic VM. You got to go well out of your way to do it. And throughout,
you're not going to do this by accident anymore.
Yeah, and throughout that process, you get alerted a couple times, like FYI, just be sure you know what you're doing, sort of thing. So
yeah. So we'll include the link, and again, check your estate. You don't want to find this out the hard way. So with that introduction, let's transition this over to Ryan. I've known Ryan for 10, 15 years now, something like that. Plus or minus, was one of the early leads in the Azure networking space with me. And, I got to talk, we were working on something the other day, and he mentioned, using a bunch of automation to make his life easier. So using Azure while he's supporting Azure. And so I thought it would be a good thing to get him on to talk about that. So Ryan, go ahead and introduce yourself. Tell us what you do for Microsoft, and then tell us how Azure is actually not just stressing you out, which it does in your day job, but also making your life easier.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm employed for a reason, right? So I work in our support org under Azure Networking, and I started at Microsoft in 2015. Actually, coming up on 3 years in like 2 weeks from now, I think. So, or 8 years, excuse me, in 2 weeks. And so, I joined Microsoft as a app development sales type role. I have no Ironically, I have a journalism background, which makes me great for podcasts, I suppose. So the fact that it's taken this long, I don't know if I should be offended or what, but yeah. So I have a communications background. So I joined in kind of a salesy role, got very technical very quickly. Ended up pushing over towards our premier field engineering roles, which I think now are called cloud CSA or something. We've renamed that role.
CSA engineering, I think.
Yeah,
Cloud Solution Architect engineering. Yeah.
And really enjoyed that. Traveling's tough. Everybody who's ever been a premier field engineer knows that is about an 85% travel job. I was in the Azure space at that point. We actually started the PFE role, me and 3 other people, and is now grown into this massive organization. So it's kind of cool to see that thing take off and grow. And the one thing I always said when I was a PFE, sitting in the office next to a bunch of CSS people, a bunch of exchange support escalation engineers, was, man, I'm never going to join CSS. Your job sounds terrible. Customers are only calling you because they're mad. You're something's always broken. And here I am, 7 years after that. About 3 months later, I was in CSS, ironically. And 7 years later, I absolutely love it. There's no shortage of problems to solve in the support world. And the problems that we solve are that we joke about how support is a grind, but the problems that we're solving in 2023 are nothing like the problems we were solving in 2015.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely.
When we started this org and this team, we had some very fundamental problems. Very young cloud, a lot of customers just moving into the cloud for the very first time and getting their feet wet and making some simple.
They had VMs. We didn't even have VNets at that time yet.
We were at the time. I think we were cloud service. I think I joined right after ARM was like a barely a thing.
Yeah.
So we have a lot. We had a lot of customers making some very very young cloud adoption mistakes, and we thought that it was the hardest thing in the world. And now when we look back, I think we have some rose-colored glasses or whatever the term is, where it's like you look back and you're like, man, the things that we're doing today in the cloud and troubleshooting some of these customer environments that are absolutely massive and so complex and so many different moving pieces, on top of just the scale of Azure itself. So my team also supports Azure networking as a fundamental, right? The physical networking side of the data center stuff. It's an absolute never-ending stream of fun, right? And so I've actually come to really like it. I think it takes a certain mindset. So my role on the team, so I started as a support engineer, just taking cases, talking to customers and grinding things out, and then moved into a technical advisor role. So some companies call this like a tech lead or whatever, where you're helping others instead of helping customers directly, right? So if Evan has a problem, or Evan, you were probably a TA when I joined, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, probably.
Or just recently. If I didn't know the answer to a question, I would go to Evan, right, at the time. And now, that's where the breadth of your impact changes from individual customers to many engineers with many customers, right? Once a couple of years ago, Azure Infrastructure in Support changed their model to kind of separate customer support TAs with business support TAs, which business support meaning supporting Azure CSS as a business, right? And so one of the complaints that we always had as TAs was like, look, management's telling us that we got to go help all these customers. That's obviously the number one goal of a TA, but I got to go talk to product group teams, and I got to go develop training, and I got to go do all these other things to help the team. There was a split at the time where we actually said, you know what, we're going to take a small percentage of you, and we're going to put you over in this bucket over here, and that's all you're going to focus on is the extra stuff. You don't have to worry about cases. You don't have to worry about any of that stuff. And that's where I landed. And that's how the automation stuff all kicked in. And so the ironic part is I'm still in cases every day. I'm still helping.
That's what we were on one together the other day. That's when this topic came up. Yeah.
I can't get away from it. I don't want to get away from it to a certain extent.
Agreed.
Well, I don't want to become a non-technical person. That's why I love this job, and I love all the things that we get to do. And so I kind of dabble in both. And thankfully, I'll give a lot of credit to my management. They give me a lot of freedom and flexibility as long as I'm helping the team, right? And so, so one of the things that that we started talking about was all of the automation stuff that's happening right now. And I think this is an industry-wide thing. It's a global thing. This isn't a Microsoft or CSS specific thing. It's with the way that the world is right now, we are all trying to do more with less, right? we're pushing to try to maximize the efficiency of all of our engineers, of all of ourselves, because that's, in the grand scheme of things, that's why we're all here. We're here as a company to make money effectively, right? And so part of that is, how can we help our customers most effectively, which we found extensively that customers appreciate efficiency. They don't want to sit and grind out a support case with Microsoft. That's kind of the old school view of how support at Microsoft works, was, oh, I'm going to create this case and it's going to be weeks before I get anything figured out. Nowadays, it's like, with the way the cloud's going, it's quick, it's fast, it's we have targets for like finishing cases in a day, things like that. So all of what we do in CSS is all around efficiency and doing more with less. And so I started getting into the automation stuff maybe 6 months, a year ago, where we started saying, you know what, this process, this tool, this whatever it is really hampering our ability to be efficient.
Go fast.
How can we hammer out some of these gotchas or some of these kinks and some of these weird process things? Microsoft is a huge, gigantic corporation. We do suffer from gigantic corporation problems such as tooling and process things. And my role is now morphed into, effectively, how can I use technology, primarily, some of it's process stuff, but a lot of it is technology, to solve some of these problems.
I mean, so functionally, it sounds like, Ryan, what you're describing, you're doing exactly what our customers are doing. This is what was interesting when we were talking last week. Like, you're doing exactly what our customers are doing. The only difference is you're doing it here inside Microsoft.
Yeah,
but it's the same. It's the same thing every other customer out there is doing.
Yes, that's exactly right. I think, and there's a huge, like I said, this is a huge focus, I think, across the world and across industries, and it's not specific to any one group. I think everyone out there is trying to do more with less and trying to leverage technology to do more, right? And so I sort of break it down into kind of three pieces, right? Number one is business process automation. Right? We've got a lot of business processes, everyone does, every company does, that are just kind of mundane, and they take a lot of clicks and they take a lot of time, or they take a lot of human beings to go do. And how can we leverage some of our tooling and some of our products to actually accelerate that and make that more efficient? The second one is, I call it pseudo app dev. I'm not an app.
I saw your code. You wrote code. I saw C# code.
But I wrote it. Was that C#? Or was that my PowerShell stuff? PowerShell is my favorite coding language that isn't a coding language. And so I you know what? I respect the heck out of all the devs in the world, because I just hate it. I'll do PowerShell all day long, but man, the second I start doing C#, maybe a little bit of Python, it's all out the window. But so I call it pseudo app dev, because we've got a lot of products and features that allow you to do things without writing code. We talk about
minimal code, maybe,
or minimal code, the Power Apps platform and things like that. I leverage those things heavily as somebody who doesn't like to do coding or front end UI work. Power Apps becomes my best friend all of a sudden, which it wasn't up until just a few weeks ago. But so that's the second one. So that's like, I need to make a tool that'll do something, right? And it has to have a UI around it. It has to be user friendly and all that other good stuff. And then the back end stuff can be whatever. The last part is really specific to us, but I don't think it's specific to us in certain ways, where we have all of our knowledge sharing within CSS within an Azure DevOps Git repository that's front-ended by a code wiki. And so that uses Markdown on the back end. It allows us to do, like, it's just like our GitHub documentation, allows users to submit pull requests to make updates, and it's very community driven. And I think we hit like 20,000 unique users a month. So it's not even like for our team, it's for kind of Microsoft whole. And it's all internal information, and it helps us solve cases, and it helps share knowledge throughout the team. Well, we have a lot, it's like 1,200 pages of Markdown code. And so it's like, we have a lot of automation pieces that maintain that and do a lot of things for us, as far as scanning for compliance and making large scale changes without having to actually hit Control F in Notepad and all sorts of other things. And so that's my third bucket is, we use a lot of Azure pipelines within ADO, aka GitHub Actions and GitHub, to automate a lot of that stuff, because it's so tightly integrated there that all of the permissions, the compliance, the auth tokens, it's all magically handled for you in a compliant and secure way, and it makes life so much easier than actually writing the code to go do it. You can do all of these things by writing code, but maintaining applications is an absolute nightmare from a security and compliance standpoint to make sure that you're doing everything right, you're doing it compliant, you're making sure that you're storing things properly. Nobody wants to be that person who leaks information, which happens across the industry all the time. And so we are able to basically leverage these already existing tools that are provided to our customers to be successful ourselves. And I think that's a super cool idea that I don't know that a lot of companies can really do like we can, because we have such that broad portfolio of different tools and different products that allow us to do all these crazy different things. It's a very unique situation that I think we've taken great advantage of, and it's been a lot of fun. And we've got a lot of things. I got a to-do list that is unbelievably long.
Let's talk about specific, because and this is sort of relevant to the technology, because and I think this, I can't remember if I looked at this code after we talked or that's what sparked the conversation, but you've got some code where you go and analyze our I think it's our traffic manager performance database, and you took this sort of very manual set of steps that people had to go do, and you turned it into this. You've got a function app, and you look like you're deploying it via a pipeline. So talk about sort of what you built there and why.
So some background, because this is not necessarily internal information, but it's not probably terribly widely known. But Azure Traffic Manager, it's a DNS-based load balancer. So I try to get to toso.trafficmanager.net, and Traffic Manager as a service is effectively a DNS server, and it decides which IP to return to you or CNAME to return to you based on a set of criteria. Customers can say, I want to be closest physically, or I want all the people in one country to go one place and all the people to go another country to another. There's a bunch of different routing policies that you can set. Well, one of the support case buckets that we get are like, hey, my IP address appears to be misrouted.
I'm going the wrong place, basically.
Wrong place. Yeah. And so anybody who's ever dealt with large-scale IP geolocation knows that it's almost impossible to get right 100% of the time, or even most of the time sometimes. MaxMind is kind of the biggest name of the game outside of Microsoft, or for general purpose use. And there's a story out there that they set, if they didn't know where something was, but they knew it was in the US, they set it to the geographical center of the US. That was where the pin would drop on the map. Well, that pin was some farmhouse in the middle of like Kansas, I think. And because so many people use these for so many different things, there's a New York Times long article about it a couple years ago I read. They got so many visitors to their house of people who are like, I saw your IP address on my, spouse's, email.
Oh, that's funny.
Whatever. They had the FBI showing up because they're like, well, this is where it said it was, and so it's not easy to do. So that's the backstory there. So what we do is we get this case in and it says, hey, I've got this IP address, I own it, it's misrouted, it's going here, it needs to go here instead. And one of the tasks that our engineers have to do is go find in this database in the back end where this IP lives. And the database is like 25 million lines long and very hard to parse and very hard to search. And
written for computers at the end of the day, right? Not humans.
You'll crash your desktop computer trying to open the thing, and it's just a mess. But the processing that happens on the back end for them to deploy it works great. And so we needed to figure out a way that we can make this a lot easier and a lot less clunky, so that we can knock these cases out. They're very easy cases. It's just a matter of it's time consuming to actually grind out the data analysis part. And so what we did, I took the database, I have it stored in an Azure encrypted storage account. And what I do is when I upload to the storage account, a function app kicks off using a blob trigger. So function apps are serverless functions. Basically, like, how do you describe a function app?
It's basically it's a script. It's an automated script that runs on command. It just runs in a container in the cloud.
There's many different ways you can do it, and you can run it in a million different ways. But I wrote this one that triggers on a blob upload. So the second I upload a new database, when a new one's released, it's about monthly or so, I'll upload it. And then the trigger kicks off and says, okay, what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna chunk all these things out into individual, I think I have it in /16s or even /12s. So I take like the first 2 octets of the IP address and I chunk those so that when I actually have to go process it, I can process a much smaller set of IPs. Because one of the problems is trying to load 25 million records into RAM using any coding language, let alone my beloved PowerShell, is pretty much impossible, right? It takes forever. And so I chunk it out. And then what I do is I wrote a second function app that uses a web trigger that will actually do the lookup for you. So if I go to my URL and I, say my IP address is 1.2.3.4, it will actually go find the correct chunk and then process that chunk for you. And what ends up happening is instead of it taking a couple hours to grind through the database and figure out what you're looking at, it spits out in about 3 seconds or 4 seconds or so. And so you're basically able to take, again, a simple problem, very simple, not a complex issue, but a time-consuming one, and condense it down into just a few seconds. And our engineers don't have to grind anything. They just get to just drop it in and go. And then they now are armed with all the information that they need about this IP address and its database backend stuff to go to our engineering team and say, okay, we need to move this IP here, and here's all the information that you need, and helps our engineering teams be efficient as well, because now they have all the information that they would otherwise have to look up on their own to do this work. And so, again, can't stress enough. Microsoft Flow has their tagline. It's now Power Automate. Their tagline is automate the easy things, and then you can focus on the hard stuff. And that's exactly what all of this revolves around. Is we've got easy problems, but they're time consuming, and trying to just hammer those things out and get solutions to those, so our engineers can be quicker, so that our customers can be helped more quickly. At the end of the day, that's the name of the game right now, and it's been a fun learning experience. Tell you that.
Yeah, Ryan, like as you were talking through this, like you talked a lot about like these are internal, and probably some of this data is even internal, right? That can't be shared. But I would imagine some of this stuff is like APIs, right? Even and which could even be public APIs in Azure and stuff like that. So I was wondering how much of this gets out to like, you could share directly with companies and say like, hey, you can do this. Like look at these certain things in the future, because maybe it takes them hours to go figure out like what's the whole stream of APIs I got to call to do this thing, and maybe even you have a function app to do it. Are you sharing any of that through like blogs or like directly or any of that like open source type thing?
We aren't at the moment. The thing that we've noticed so far as part of our process automation stuff, especially shareable things, is that it's a very unique problem to Microsoft. Very few companies have to parse, millions and millions and millions of IP addresses to get this specific information about it. I think some of the back end stuff and some of the deeper things that have to do with the actual product engineering side of it. What we do instead, and one of the big things we push for, and actually I'm talking with traffic manager PMs about this now. I should probably reach back out to that person actually. Is making these things public. Right, so I got touched base last week with one of the dev leads for traffic management. He's like, hey, I found this, I noticed CSS is using this cool thing. He's a relatively new PM, and he's like, I want to make this into a more official internal app, so that it's not being maintained by some random support engineer or support contact. And B, the next step being, let's make it available to customers, right? That's kind of the end goal, right? How long it takes to make that happen and how that works out is a whole other story. But the gist is, it's like, we have this process, we built this tool, we built this thing, and we're benefiting greatly from it. But how can we expand that benefit outside of our little scope of work? And that's the other side of my role right now. Is I'm part of the Azure networking team here in Microsoft. However, the things that I'm building and the things that I am doing, and some of the other things that we'll probably touch on here in a little bit, expand well beyond Azure networking and across support and even beyond. And so that's the next step in all of these projects is, okay, you built this cool thing. That's wonderful. That's cool. That's impact. We like that. It helps the company. But what about what's next, right? How can you expand that and take that even a step further to help either other teams within Microsoft or publicly making these tools available and things like that? And some of the things that we have as far as code things, a lot of it's obviously proprietary internal stuff, but at the same time, when it's an option, we like to be able to push things to our Azure GitHub, the public Azure GitHub as examples or as code snippets. We've got there's like 2,500 repositories in the Azure GitHub, I think, many of which are obviously like tools like Azure CLI and the docs and all the other stuff. But there's a huge amount of repos out there that are really cool things that people build, and they just bring them out and they want to share it with the world. And so we always have that in the back of our mind for things that are publicly shareable. But yeah, so a lot of the stuff that we've been doing recently is very specific product engineering things, which will eventually make it to the public, but not via, here's a view into the back end sort of thing just yet, just due to some of the data compliance.
But I think you hit on something that I think is really key, and this is why I thought sort of your story was really cool. Is traditionally, go back 10 years, right? This problem, this behavior would be flipped, where you would have this idea, you'd hack something together with some code, or you'd go, I can't write code, so I'll write a spec. You got to go convince somebody somewhere in an engineering team, a component team, to invest in it. You got to get, make it compliant, and then we ship it, and customers may or may not use it, and then we get feedback on it from customers. What you're able to do is sort of flip this on its head and say, I got this idea, I can build something that is, maybe it doesn't scale, maybe it's got some, it isn't ready for sort of customer facing, but it works. You can demonstrate the business value. And now when you go try and justify and say, hey, we think we should put this in front of customers, you have a much more solid story. So the Power Automate and the Azure functions have allowed, like, think about what it took to put a web server out there, 10 years ago, and make sure it didn't have, everything open to the world. Right. Yep. Like, so it really allows you to go do things faster at the end of the day and get things out to your customers faster as well.
And not only that, it allows you to think about how long it took to put a web server together, even just from a proof of concept standpoint,
yep.
or can we justify this as a business need? I'm able to spin things up in hours that would have otherwise taken months, right?
Yeah.
And not to mention, boy, oh boy, if I didn't know whatever language I needed to know for that code, I was out of luck, right? And you had to go find somebody who did. And so for, one of the other examples, the great example that I'm working on right now is we have a pretty antiquated out of office alerting system where we say, hey, team, I'm going to be out of office. And it's just email. You just email your team. But there's a bunch of stuff that has to happen on the back end so that we make sure that you're pulled out of your support queues, and that you're not going to get assigned customer cases, and that Microsoft HR knows that you're off, and all these other things have to happen in the back end, right? And so one of the things that came up in recent months is like, hey, we should fix that process. And this week I finally kicked that off. We started working on it, and I was able to spin up, using Power Apps, a actual full-blown UI, multi-page UI, where it provides all the information to the user that they need. And then when they hit submit, obviously then it goes and kicks off a bunch of backend stuff. In like a matter of like 8 hours, I had this thing built, and I knew nothing in Power Apps before this week.
Power Apps is cool. I love Power Apps.
Automate and Logic Apps were my go-tos, with the side of Function Apps. But this was like brand new to me. And I was able to learn in hours what probably would have taken me months years ago, right? And so I think that's another huge aspect where companies can take their ideas, this random idea from this random engineer, and with almost no background on whatever it is they're trying to do, or whatever platform they're trying to build it on, build it and build a proof of concept. I didn't have to go find a Power Apps engineer or a UI engineer to go learn CSS and HTML and Bootstrap and all these other things. No, I could just do it. I know none of those things at all. But I'm able to put this thing together and say, okay, management, leadership, here's this thing I built as a proof of concept. Here's the existing process. Here's the theoretical new process. Yeah, sure, it's not fully baked yet. I've got to put the back end together and do all that stuff. But the gist is, here is what the end user experience would be, and how much easier it is. Not only how much easier it is for the end users, but how much easier it's going to be for us on the back end. Right now, we spend a lot of time dealing with out of office requests, and the amount of manual labor that has to go into making sure all the check boxes get checked from a corporate standpoint, right? The boring corporate stuff of like, yeah, HR needs to know you took a sick day or whatever it is, right? That stuff is all mundane. It's easy. Again, going back to our easy but time-consuming discussion. And this allowed me to basically say, okay, we can solve that. And here's how we can solve it. And I can show you a proof of concept within a couple of days at most. I think I started on Tuesday, and just this morning I wrapped it up, and I'm presenting it to leadership later today or tomorrow. I mean, it's unbelievably quick how or it's great how quickly you can iterate in this day and age versus where you were years ago, where I had to build code, I had to build and do debugging, and I had Visual Studio heavy on my computer, and it was a nightmare, right? And that amount of work, just the tools that we provide and that we create for our customers, leveraging those things internally to say, hey, I could just spin this thing up real quick and show you what it's going to be like, and then we can get feedback, and then we can iterate on that feedback very quickly. And then again, because all of these low code and no code tools are already compliant by definition, they are already, we know they're compliant. You can't write your own code to make them not compliant even. I don't have to worry about whether data is being handled in proper ways, because that's already been handled for me, right? Because so not that we're dealing with customer data, but we're dealing with employee data to a certain extent, right? Names and emails and phone numbers and things like that. There's a certain level of privacy and compliance that goes along with that. And one of the big things that I don't have to worry about as an engineer is making sure that that is being handled in a proper way, because the tool has already been developed in a way that is confirmed and accepted by Microsoft security and all those people to say, yes, you can use this to handle X, Y, and Z data. Maybe not A, B, and C, because maybe, there's some highly confidential information that we don't want in there. But for my purposes, this is great, because now I don't have to worry about making sure I go talk to the privacy team to make sure that I'm fully compliant. And then they want to come in and they want to look at your code. And then they're going to probably tear it apart because I'm not a good code guy. And then now I have to go spend a whole bunch of time fixing it in a way that makes it compliant. All of that's out the window now. All I have to do at this point is say, here's what I want to build. Here are the tools that I'm able to build it with that are already 100% compliant. Go nuts. And not only that, but you don't even have to know how to write the code. Underneath the hood, it's all handled for you. And it's just, like I said, the speed at which we can iterate and advance in this company right now is like nothing I've seen. And I mean, I've been here for, I've been in the industry for a little over 10 years, and it's like 10 years ago, man, none of this stuff would have been even remotely
Yeah, it was
possible.
hard. It was really hard. Yeah, no, I mean, I think those are great stories of, I mean, you and I know each other through Azure networking, but none of this has anything to do with networking. I mean, it happens to be that one of your technical solutions uses networking data, but the business process automation just happens to be that business that you're in. So this is great, Ryan. I appreciate you coming and telling this. Any last thoughts, or guidance you want to leave our audience with?
Yeah, one of the things that you just touched on that I think is really important is that it doesn't take an engineer to do any of these things, especially with some of the Power Automate. This, the simplicity of all the no-code stuff means that if you're and I see this all the time, even internally here, is like, I'm an accountant and I need to do X, Y, and Z with this data. I can just spin that up as an accountant. I don't even need to know anything about the technology that's under the hood and make it happen. And so to empower everyone to be able to use these tools, where in the past, Visual Studio is wonderful, love it to death, but if you don't know anything about coding and you open up Visual Studio, it's a nightmare, right? And so you're able to basically abstract the deep technical aspects of what you're doing from the user, which means that anyone could do this. And so I want to stress that as you look at these technologies and these products in Azure, and you're a company that maybe is in Azure, but you're not a technical person, or you're in a different org and you feel like, oh no, that's not for me, check it out. I mean, some of the things that you do on a daily basis can be handled by a lot of these business process automation tools, especially when we look at like Power Automate, for example. And they require absolutely no technical depth and no technical knowledge, and it's so easy to use. So that's my big thing is bringing other people into the fold, because there's a huge opportunity across an infinite number of technologies and companies and industries to improve that efficiency using some of these tools, and it doesn't require a computer science degree to make it happen.
says the journalism major. Not that we have anything against journalism majors, but like that's about as far as you can get, right? From computer science, right?
Yeah, I took a Java class in college, and I was like, you know what, this ain't for me. And here I am, a technical.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, no, great, Ryan. Thank you very much for coming on. We'll look forward, maybe at some point we'll have you back on, and you can tell us, in 6 months or 12 months, what other cool things you've been able to build, right? At that point. So great. Kale, any last thoughts?
No, this is great. Thanks, Ryan, for all this. I'm sure our listeners will love this. I love the aspect of the data handling too. I think
Yeah.
that's super important because in the past it was always like dump it to Excel and then we'll take a look at it, and then the Excel spreadsheets are all over the place, and next thing you know, you got data leakage. So it's like
Exactly.
that's a super important part. So love you
Awesome.
hitting on that. Yeah.
Big focus right now in across the industry is customer data handling and privacy, right? And Microsoft is unbelievably focused on that right now. And so to be able to not have to worry about it and say, you know what, I know that this is good and secure and I'm handling it properly, takes a huge weight off of my shoulders as the person who's building the tool. And so cannot stress that piece enough as well. It's a really good call out.
Yeah. Awesome. Great. Well, everybody, thanks again. Thanks, Ryan. Appreciate you coming
Thanks
on.
for having me. Appreciate it.